So in your work in Cincinnati and in your work in Alabama and your work in Philadelphia, and also from the work that you've been doing at UVM, what do you see as sort of some of the key leverage points for really changing the way that teachers teach? And I recognize that there's a lot of distractions in their environments that
Right.
probably push against this.
The old mantra that the way teachers learn something is a key driver of how they teach later on is is alive and well. And I think a lot of teachers struggle teaching conceptually or teaching through problems because they never learned it like that. So to me, one of the values of rich content, and I would say pedagogical content in particular, is it gives them a chance to learn something in a different way that they probably knew in another more traditional, more rule-based way. And oftentimes my experience with that is teachers will learn something and they'll say, oh my gosh, that's what it means to divide by a fraction. I didn't know that before. And I think that moment is a real hinge point in that those are the feelings you want to give to your students. And there's not a teacher out there that doesn't want their students to feel the same way they did. So part of it is not only thinking about this well of knowledge that teachers have to have. I think the first thing is they've got to experience what it means to learn in a different way than we all learned. Then I think we have an opportunity to say, what are the tools and strategies you need to know or we need to explore for you to pass that feeling you just had onto your kids? So I think that's one of the critical parts of content knowledge.
So one question that I have is, you're obviously very well versed when you deliver that different experience to teachers and they have that aha moment. Have you been able to have enough touch points with teachers to follow how that plays out when they go back into their classroom settings, and what kind of continued support a teacher really needs to really incorporate this new way of conveying understanding to students into their repertoires?
That's a great question. And actually, I think, John, that the easy part are the 5-day PDs.
Yeah.
Or the teaching of teachers. And if the material is rich and the problems are rich, I think you can be guaranteed that for most teachers, they're gonna leave an experience like that and say, oh, that was wonderful. That was just a great way to spend a few days. But we know, or at least I think I know, that experience is not enough in and of itself for the average teacher to go back and do something differently. And I think there's a long list of research around professional development that would back that up, that the chances that teachers are going to do something different because they learned something different are not as rich as we would hope them to be. So I think there's a few things that I've been working on in the last 5 years that I think are an attempt at answering that question. One of them is that when teachers learn something new in a PD situation, I think whether it's immediate or whether it's the next thing on the list, but what they have to do is they have to see that new learning in the materials and the structures they use every single day. So we have to think about when the teachers learn something, what we're asking them to do is to go back in that hour and 15 minutes that they're with kids with this particular textbook, with this particular structure in their school, and how do I take what I learned and insert it into this structure that already exists. So, for example, it's not surprising that in a lot of textbooks there's very little problems, what I would call a problem. There's a lot of exercises, there's a lot of practice, there's even a lot of really nice conceptual pieces in that book, but there's no problems. So if a teacher leaves a PD and say, oh, I understand why these rich problems are so important, and then they open up their book on Monday and they don't see any problems in there, the chances that what they learned in that PD that are going to make it into their classroom are small, I think. And so what you have to do, I believe, is simultaneously have that book out or those materials out so that we're constantly learning something new when we're saying, and here's how it looks when you open up your book. How do we make this new learning part of what you're already doing in this, using this book that you're using, for example? So I see rich PD meaning I learned something and now I have to see what the tools are that I'm using and how those can be effective in learning in a new way. Because I do know that, most teachers, I believe, get really excited about something they learned in the summer. They start up in September, and what typically happens, I think, is the first time they run into trouble with that new idea. For example, something doesn't work the way the teacher in the summer told them it was going to work. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they get to that part, a little chip of that new knowledge gets thrown out. Well, I can't really do that now. And so that happens several times, and by the time you get to November, there's very little left of what was in the summer because there were too many issues that I didn't know how to deal with along the way. And I think one of the key issues is there's not a parallel match between this new knowledge and the typical materials that the teachers use back in their classroom. So I think that has to be part of the training.
Yeah. You've spoken in other conversations that we've had about the importance of setting up routines for teachers when they go back into the classroom.
Right.
Is what you're describing one of the thoughts about a routine?
When Da Vinci made the statue of David, he needed two things, right? He needed this grand conceptual understanding of David, but he had to be able to hit the chisel with a hammer. And if you can't hit the chisel with a hammer, this vision of David didn't matter. And I think that's what we run into in schools, is we have these grand visions from the summer. But if I can't hit the chisel with the hammer when I go in on Monday, those things fall apart. So I think we have to be very specific, very small, but very doable on how we want you, what are the best ways to hit the chisel with that hammer, and to be able to do that on a regular basis. And I think that gets to the second one of the tenets you mentioned earlier is over time, is that I think teachers could do something differently tomorrow that's very small that could be very significant for kids. And so I think that we tend to think about change as being these seismic changes, and that's what teachers are used to. We have a new reading program in September. We have a new math program in September. We have a new principal in September. We have all these new things. And when you look at it as a teacher, you're saying they're asking me to change like everything I do. And change, I don't think, happens that way. So I think it's very logical that things get thrown out of the cart. But if you look at very small changes, but you look at them over time, and you look at a system that top to bottom is supportive of all those small changes and are convincing teachers that we're going to be in this for the long haul and we're going to be with you, I think that's how, to me, change happens. That's lasting.
Wonderful. Okay, Bob, have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, John. Bye.
Bye.